Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how is it going?
It is going great. I got to produce a podcast earlier this week with Orlando Pace on it on the Scoop World Order podcast that Kirk Barton hosts. If you have not subscribed to Scoop World Order, strongly recommend you subscribe to that. The Orlando Pace episode should be dropping probably Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe. So having already heard the conversation, that is something you are going to definitely want to check out. So I would go ahead and subscribe to Scoop World Order right now. Just take my word for it.
Yeah, I believe it'll be out sometime on Wednesday. Yeah, so that's pretty cool, I guess, getting to talk to the arguably the greatest Buckeye of all time, certainly the greatest offensive lineman of all time. So, yeah, Tom, he's all proud of himself and whatnot. And am I annoyed by it? Sure. Who wouldn't be? But this is Orlando Pace, and there is only one guy like him. For me, Tom, he was the perfect football player. I don't ever recall seeing him make a mistake in college. You could point to anybody else, and they were not perfect. For me, he is the perfect football player.
I would say is pretty darn close if he wasn't perfect. I know he went through multiple seasons without giving up a sack, and as a left tackle, that's pretty remarkable because you're probably getting matched up against the best pass rusher the other team has. And, he talked about not having tight ends on his side ever and not having, they were always sliding the other way because it was like, well, Orlando will take care of that. It'll be fine. And, we'll slide the line the other way and we'll put the tight end on the other side. So it was just him and some other really good pass rusher, and somehow no one ever got to the quarterback. So, yep, that seems pretty good.
It was like they put him on an island, like a cornerback who is on an island. That was Pace Island, and nobody survived. But all the pancakes you could eat. So that was nice. So that conversation with Orlando Pace is kind of what springs this series of two shows in which Tom and I will go through it and pick our greatest of all time at each position on the football field for the Buckeyes. And we've done our Mount Rushmore shows before, which Tom absolutely loved, but that was a very long time ago. And so rather than talking about four players, which is totally easy to come up with four, now we're talking about just the greatest of all time at each position. And generally, that Tom, the exercise of is so-and-so a Hall of Famer, and if you have to think about it, they're not. I wonder if for you, was this one of those things where it's the first name that goes into your head? Is that the greatest? And then do you have to kind of, actually yourself and think about a couple of other players? Are you going with the first quick reaction, or are you stepping back a little bit?
I went through and plugged in my first reaction for most of the different positions, and then I went back and looked because, my first reaction for a lot of these is going to be guys who played probably from the 1970s and on. And, there are also some pretty good players earlier than that. So I went back and looked at the Ohio State All-Century team that the Touchdown Club of Columbus released in 2000, just to, make sure I wasn't missing anyone really remarkable. And, yeah, there's a few older names on here as well. But, yeah, I mean, in general, if you have followed Ohio State football for a while, these are, by and large, going to be names that probably pop into your head pretty quickly if you're thinking of who was the best fill in the blank position for Ohio State ever.
So let's start. Let's begin where it all begins, at quarterback. And for me, my initial reaction is Troy Smith, because he has the Heisman, and that's the award. That's the college football award, and he's got that. He's got the record against Michigan, 3-0 as a starter. He took the Buckeyes to a national championship. Obviously, they did not win through no fault of his own, I'm sure. But for me, that's the guy that I immediately come up with. I believe if we do this next year, that name will be Justin Fields. I believe that Dwayne Haskins is the best passing quarterback I've ever seen at Ohio State. But I going with a one-year guy as the GOAT, I don't think I can. Plus, the running game suffered a little bit, or a lot of it. I don't know how much of that was Dwayne Haskins. But for me, I got to go with Troy Smith, even though there are guys like Braxton Miller and Terrell Pryor who certainly have arguments and would probably win those arguments if they both had a senior season at quarterback. So where are you? I'm going Troy Smith, Tom.
I have Troy Smith, and but this is going to be a different answer this time next year, written down. So, yep, I think we're in agreement there. The other name that I think is worthy of at least being in consideration here is Rex Kern, who is the quarterback for the Super Softs in 68 and then 69 and 70. Went 27-2 as a starting quarterback. Seems pretty good. They won the 68 national championship, 2 Big Ten titles, played in a couple Rose Bowls. He was an All-American in 1969, team captain in 1970. If they had just won one more game, if they had either beaten Michigan in 1969 and won the national championship that year, or beaten Stanford in the Rose Bowl in 1970 and won a actual national championship, not that year, and not just I think it's a National Football Foundation, which awarded it at the end of the regular season instead of after bowl games. If he had 2 kind of consensus national championships, I think he's the guy there. But, sorry, 27-2, not good enough, Rex Kern. Sorry about your luck.
And before Troy Smith, the answer was Rex Kern, I think universally. And Joe Germain would have been mentioned in there, even though he only had 1 year as a starter, but he played well as a co-starter with Stanley Jackson in 96 and 97. Bobby Hoying was a 3-year starter, but really only great in 95, the final year he was a starter. So, thinking back to my college days and beyond, the answer was Rex Kern, and then Troy Smith happened. And I remember people trying to argue Craig Krenzel because he went undefeated in 2002 and had a great record, and nobody else had done that and led the Buckeyes to the national championship. But when you look at the numbers that Craig Krenzel produced, I mean, he was as likely to be 12 for 15 as he was 4 for 21. So, and maybe so was Kern, but it was a different time back then. I think we're pretty much in agreement there. Before Troy, it was Rex Kern, rightfully so. And when you talk to, I don't want to call them old timers. The generation before us, they would swear by Rex Kern up and down.
Okay, boomer.
So let's move to running back, Tom. And I'm interested to hear where you're going.
Well, there's a guy who was a 3-time All-American, won a couple Heisman trophies, has the school record with 5,589 rushing yards. I think it's pretty hard to unseat him. I think there are plenty of arguments to be made that there have been running backs. Ezekiel Elliott was a faster, stronger, better running back than Archie Griffin, but he did not win 1 Heisman Trophy, let alone 2. He was not a 3-time All-American. I don't know how you can go with anyone other than Archie here. Eddie George is in the conversation. Hopalong Cassidy's in the conversation, but I don't know how you could go with anyone other than Eddie George.
I'm going to have to call you out there, Tom, because you just said
anyone other than Archie Griffin. I don't know what you think you heard. I don't know how you can go with anyone other than Archie Griffin. Back to you.
I am not editing that.
Nope. As well, you should not.
And the answer is Archie, but you look for, can I make it Ezekiel Elliott? And yeah, I sure can, based on what he did in his 2 years as a starter, 1,800 yards in both those years. And physically, he is faster and bigger and stronger than Archie. But like you said, Ezekiel Elliott does not even have a tree in Buckeye Grove. He was never an All-American. J.K. Dobbins, I think, is a contender because he was a 3-year starter. Him and Archie are the only 2 running backs in the Ohio State total offense in the top 15. Everybody else is quarterbacks. They both produced over 5,000 yards of total offense. So I think J.K. is in the mix there. But how do you unseat what Archie did? And I think there are other players like him at Ohio State where it's there's almost nothing you can do to top them. And that then becomes a situation of are you being fair to the other guys, the newest guys that are coming along? Because if you're automatically saying nobody can top Archie, and you're watching guys rush for more yards, and Archie was like 1,400, 1,500 yard season guy as that's what he would max out at. And so many other guys have done more than that. Are we selling them short, Tom, and just not even allowing them into the picture?
Archie Griffin just has such a unique spot in not just Ohio State history, but college football history that, I mean, there certainly is a case to be made that the second Heisman he won was not, he may or may not have been the best player in the country that year, but just the overall body of work there, it's real hard to match. And there are always difficulties in comparing players across generations because you get, passing stats that looked like explosive passing stats in the 1970s are like middle to bottom of the pack now. And, the game has changed. Tempo is a lot faster. How many more snaps are teams getting right now where the yardage totals are probably a little out of whack from the 3 yards in a cloud of dust days when they were huddling and probably running 20% fewer plays at least per game. So the stats are kind of hard to compare across generations. And yeah, it is kind of an unfair position to be in. Can you ever catch up with the guy who won 2 Heismans? No, probably not. And that's probably not fair, but also he won 2 Heismans. So
there is also the fact that Archie was doing this when everybody knew the run was coming. You didn't necessarily know if it was going to be the quarterback or the fullback or the running back, but you had a pretty good understanding that it's going to be a run. And so they were running into 8-9 man fronts every single time, and he was still productive. So I think we can go with Archie on that and be safe and not really cause any controversy there. Let's go to receiver, which
Sir.
Yes, go ahead.
This is an Ohio State football team. Fullback, sir. My goodness.
No, you're absolutely right.
My goodness.
Sorry.
And speaking of players where you knew the run was coming and you couldn't do anything about it, Mr. Pete Johnson.
Yeah.
Pete Johnson was the fullback for Archie Griffin in 1973 and 74 and 75. Still holds the school record, 5 rushing touchdowns in a game against North Carolina. Still holds the school record of 25 rushing touchdowns in a season in 1975. And you want to talk about something where the other team knew it was coming. That was Pete Johnson. Pete Johnson, it was like, okay, Ohio State's got the ball in the 2. What could it be? It could be literally anything. They could hand it to Pete Johnson. Pete Johnson could take the handoff. He could go up the middle. He could go up the middle on the other side. Literally anything could happen. And yet Pete Johnson scored 25 touchdowns in a season. That's That's pretty good, and that is a person who is probably not going to be unseated on this team at any point anytime soon, because I don't see the fullback becoming a real featured part of the Ohio State offense anytime soon.
Yeah, like Pete Johnson. Is he going to go between the tackles? Is he going to go between the guards? It could be anything. But Tom, when I ask you, who is your favorite fullback, Ohio State fullback of all time? Who would that
Nicky
be?
Sualua.
There.
Nicky Sualua, yes.
Being a fan of the 90s, just growing up, even back into the 80s, I don't go too far into the 80s, but like Scotty Graham, you grow up watching Ohio State, and the fullbacks would be some of your favorite players. Like, I loved watching Scotty Graham and Carlos Snow as the 1-2 punch, but Scotty Graham, Nicky Sualua, Jeff Cothran, even Raymont Harris played a little bit of fullback, but Matt Keller on the mid-90s teams, just even Jamar Martin later on, but the fullback was, and I do apologize for skipping the fullbacks because that was wrong of me. And Tom, now we are even. I called you out for misspeaking, and you called me out for my egregiosity, and so I appreciate that. But yeah, you can't overlook the fullback. Such a famed position and a favorite position of those of us who are in our 30s, let's say, Tom.
Neck roll aficionados, yes.
There you go. Perfect. And if you guys don't know what neck rolls are, God bless you, go Google and just look at some of these monsters. And go YouTube Nicky Sualua in the flats or wherever, and Jeff Cothran. The guy was awesome. I was watching some of the 92 Louisville game the other day. It was on the Big Ten Network on Monday. Get to see Jeff Cothran out there, Robert Smith, poor Joey Galloway. Just so...
So
wrong
wasted.
generation, yes. that poor guy. Speaking of Joey Galloway, and let's move on to receivers, where I think you could ask any Buckeye fan, and you'll get not a different answer, but I don't know if there's a consensus. And for me, the answer is David Boston, because of what he did while he was at Ohio State, which is what we were judging him on. Never won the Blitnikoff, but was dominating in 97 and 98, earned a starting job midway through the 96 season as a freshman, unseating Buster Tillman, catches the touchdown against Arizona State to win that game, gets to punch Charles Woodson. I mean, come on. That's the trifecta or the quadfecta. That's all of them. So for me, it's David Boston, and he gets run down because of what he did in the NFL or what he didn't do, because what he did do one year is lead the league in receiving yards, so let's not forget that. But he was, and maybe it's because I was in school at the same time he was, and I got to see what he could do firsthand. He was a killer on the sidelines. He'd catch a pass on the sideline, spin, and pick up another 12, 15 yards. He was fast. He was big. I remember the first time I saw him on a football field, he looked like a tight end, and back then he was listed at like 6'3", 205. But just to tell you what the game was like way back when, he was bigger than most guys were supposed to be, and he was fast. And remember, I've told this story probably 1,000 times, leaving the Pitt game in 96 before the game was over, halfway to the dorm rooms, and we heard the crowd explode, and that was when he had his punt return against 8 Pitt Panthers at the end of the game. Or it was 11 against 11 Pitt Panthers with only like 8 Buckeyes on the field at the time. He was awesome, and it was always capable of making something big happen, and generally did. So that's why I'm going with David Boston, knowing that there are other answers that are just as acceptable.
Yeah, I went through and put together basically a full lineup for if you have, here's your quarterback and you've got a running back and a fullback and 3 wide receivers, but yeah, I would have David Boston at the top of my list. The 3 people I had were Boston, Terry Glenn, and Chris Carter, all 3 of whom had, were statistically right at the top of the list. Boston is remarkable because he is second in career receiving yards. He just got passed for career receptions this last year by KJ Hill for the Ohio State record, and he did all of that in 3 years. He was not a 4-year player. He was the best in Ohio State history in receptions and second highest in career receiving yards in just 3 years. That's a pretty good, gives you a pretty good sense for where he, how great he was during those 3 seasons. And, he was an All-American. I think it would be difficult to put anyone higher than that. Terry Glenn had probably the single best season, you could argue, for Ohio State as a wide receiver. He won the Blitnikoff in 95, but that was basically his one season. That was it. So, he's on that list somewhere. And Chris Carter, 4th all-time in receiving yards. He left as the record holder for career touchdowns. Again, and he only played 3 seasons. So he's got to be in that conversation as well. But yeah, I'm with you. I think David Boston is the top of the list there.
Terry Glenn had the best season of any Ohio State receiver ever, and it was incredible to watch. And he actually missed a couple of games in there while going for 1,400 or 1,500 yards and a whole bunch of touchdowns. Chris Carter was the guy before David Boston. Ted Ginn, Santonio Holmes, these are all very talented guys who kind of also played at the wrong time, even though they did well. It's just kind of surprising neither of those guys were 1,000-yard receivers, but Ohio State hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver before Paris Campbell in 2018. You'd have to go all the way back to Michael Jenkins in 2002, which brings up Michael Jenkins, who is the career yardage leader and perhaps the most underrated Ohio State receiver of all time, considering the mark he has made. And I know there are Buckeye fans who have him as number 1 on the list. I disagree with it because, yes, he was very good and he played 4 seasons, although didn't play much his freshman season. He was good. I don't know that he was ever great.
Yeah, he was very consistently just a very good player. He reminds me a little bit of KJ Hill, where he was just very consistent. He seemed like he was there forever, always there to make a big play, but was never seemed like this is definitely the best player on the field. Like everyone agrees, this is, if you're watching Michael Jenkins. Like, yeah, I mean, he was a very, very good player, but he was not necessarily the standout player on that team. I mean, obviously that was kind of Claret on offense. And, that part of that may be a function a little bit of that offense, which was, you touched on Craig Krenzel's passing earlier, like inconsistent, let's say. And Jim Tressel was not the most aggressive play caller. It would be interesting to take all of these guys, Ted Ginn, Chris Carter, Michael Jenkins, David Boston, Terry Glenn, put them on some of the more recent Ryan Day offenses and see what they're doing statistically at that point. Because I would love to see Ted Ginn on a modern Ohio State offense. That would be a lot of fun. Just have Ted Ginn run the mesh routes just over the middle. get Ted Ginn matched up with Brandon Watson like that. That's something I would like to see once or twice.
Well, and leading up to this, I was just imagining I need to reach out to all of these old Buckeye receivers and ask them what it would be like for them to play now in this, because I'm just imagining Joey Galloway just embarrassing dudes. Like, imagine him getting the ball forced to him like they do with Rondale Moore at Purdue. And you're talking about a guy who runs a 4.2, benches 400 pounds, and Joey Galloway can run with the deep routes just fine. And he was 20 years before his time, or even 15 years before his time, and it's too bad. Or 30, no, it was like 30 years almost. Gee whiz, Tom, the years, they go by. What about tight ends?
See, I went way off the board here. This is my way off the board pick. Wes Fesler, who I'm sure everyone remembers, 3-time All-American, 1930 to 1932. Every year is the year of the tight end at Ohio State, but 1930 to 1932, truly the years of the tight end at Ohio State. He went on to coach Ohio State later. That's probably why you remember the name, but I mean, they've had some good tight ends recently, but if you were the only 3-time All-American, then sure, I think that's the answer.
That's pretty good. I went with John Frank just because he is the all-time leader in receptions and tight ends for Ohio State. But what? Give me a size and weight on Wes Fesler as a tight end back in like 1992. Tom, was he like 5'9", 165? Is that what we're talking about?
That's probably about right. It's I have an offensive lineman coming up a little later who was a 2-time All-American Outland winner, and I looked at the size and weight, and I was like, that can't be right. But
like 6'2", 258?
6'2", 200 pounds. But we'll get there. We'll get there. It's like, I don't think he'd hold up well in the modern game. But yeah, I can see if I can track down the 1932 Ohio State football roster. But yeah, I'm gonna guess he was Wes Fesler is probably about 5'10" and $160 or $170 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood.
But you know what? If you're recognized at the time, then why not? And I'm okay with that. Ricky Dudley was the best I've seen, but that was like 1 year, but he was really good. Nick Van Nett and Jeff Hireman were also very good. And I wonder, Tom, even through all of these positions, is there a possibility that maybe like Jeremy Ruckert, or is there somebody on the roster that could become the greatest tight end in Ohio State history right now? Do you think?
I could see, I mean, if Jeremy Ruckert put up a 600, 700-yard receiving season this year and caught 10, 12 touchdowns, like I think you could absolutely put him in that conversation. He's got the physical ability to do it. It's more just, will he get the ball enough? That is the eternal question with Ohio State tight ends. Will they get the ball enough to put up the numbers that you would need to really be in this conversation? Because I'm with you. I actually had John Frank. We talked at the beginning about, you sort of go in and you just sort of fill out the names, and then you can think, as your first reaction. And John Frank was my first reaction. He was the first name I had down there. But I think you could make an argument that Jeremy Ruckert could get into this, at least into this conversation with a big year this year. But they also have a pretty talented wide receiver room and a pretty talented running back room, and the ball is getting getting spread a lot of different areas. I mean, you think about 1995, and Terry Glenn had big receiving numbers, and Eddie George ran for 1,900 yards, and Ricky Dudley also had a big year. But it was like those were the three guys on offense that they really, really pounded it into in 1995. It gets spread so many different places now that it's hard to put up those numbers the way that guys did in the past.
What about former Ohio State defensive coordinator Fred Pugich, who led the team, a former tight end for the Buckeyes, led the team in receiving in 1973 with 9 catches?
I mean, that's a pretty big year. There were a few years in the 1970s that I remember going through, and it was like, how did the leading passer throw 1 touchdown all season? How is that possible?
Or the sad thing is, you go to 2011 and the leading receiver for the Buckeyes had 14 catches. Granted, there were 3 of them, but that was the year without a quarterback.
Yes, that's not great.
That's
not really what we're looking for.
Tom, let's talk about offensive line. Are we doing this tackle, guard, center?
I actually went all the way across. I have
wow.
2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. But I mean, we can break it down however you want to. If we want to go tackle, guard, center, I'm on board with that.
I'll let you go ahead. You can go tackle first, Tom. Who do you think is the greatest Ohio State tackle of all time?
Well, I mean, this is a really difficult decision. Definitely not. There definitely wasn't anyone who inspired this particular episode who was such an obvious choice. That So Orlando Pace is the answer here. Orlando Pace is probably the best player on this team, period. He was 4th in the Heisman Trophy, which remains one of the greatest miscarriages of justice of all time. Just the single most dominating player I have ever seen on any team in college football, period, end of story. Just absolutely incredible. To me, the more interesting conversation is who would be the second person behind, if you're having 2 tackles. And I guess you go John Hicks. He was second in the Heisman Trophy in 1973.
Hicks on the right side?
I believe. Yeah. I'm not moving Orlando Pace to the right side. Sorry. No. John Hicks is probably your right tackle. Orlando Pace said that Corey Stringer was... He was asked on the Kirk Barton episode, about some of the other great offensive linemen in Ohio State history. He had a lot of incredible stuff to say about Corey Stringer. You'll be able to hear that on Scoop World Order on Wednesday. But yeah, that was, I think Corey Stringer could be in that conversation. But yeah, it's probably John Hicks at the other tackle spot.
If we're talking right tackles, I immediately think of Corey Stringer. But Kirk Barton, All-American at right tackle.
It's true. It is true.
That's all you got?
He was an All-American. He was a captain. Yep. Now works at BuckeyeScoop.com. So I mean, it's really a question of how many bonus points we would like to give him for that, because he is a name. He's a name you could absolutely very legitimately have on this list. I mean, they have not had that many All-American tackles. So you want to put together a top 10 list. I would feel very comfortable with him being somewhere on that list, but. I don't think even Kirk would put himself at the Corey Stringer, Orlando Pace level, or John Hicks.
So now we move to, let's talk about a pair of guards. I guess Jim Parker has to be one of them, right? I mean, he was All-American a couple of times.
Outland winner. And he was, he was the one who was 6'2", 200 pounds. And it was like, is that really right? Really? Yeah, college and football, pro football Hall of Famer. Yeah, I mean, he is, one of the first great Ohio State offensive linemen, and I think if you're picking one guard, I think that's him. The other guard spot, I had a couple of people that was like, yeah, it could be any of these, and I'd be okay with them.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like Rob Murphy or Wyatt Davis, or even some of the Pat Elflein was a guard, for a little bit. There's a bunch, but I don't think anybody steps up. Andrew Norwell, another one. I believe he was an All-American. So there are guys there.
Jim Lachey was the other. Jim Lachey was the name I landed on. All-American, number 12 pick in the NFL draft. But I think very much like quarterback, I think you could have Wyatt Davis puts up one more good year like he did last year, ends up an All-American. I think you very legitimately could put Wyatt Davis in that spot this time next year.
So what do you have at center then?
I went with LaCharles Bentley, 2001 Remington Award winner, and one of the other people that got the Orlando Pace seal of approval. So I'm going to trust Orlando Pace's judgment here. And LaCharles Bentley was, a Pro Bowler in the NFL, and probably would have had a much longer career in the NFL if he had not had a pretty bad injury and then like a staph infection. But he's now coaching offensive linemen. He's got a training facility for offensive linemen out in Arizona, so he's still involved in the offensive line game. Yeah, center is a spot where you have 4 very good choices just from 2000 on for Ohio State. You could go Mangold, you could go Elflein, you could go Price there, but I'll go with LaCharles Bentley. What about you?
Yeah, that's who I did. I went LaCharles, and then I had Nick Mangold number 2, even though the 4 that you mentioned, Mangold is the only one who didn't win the Remington, but was an All-American, and I think the Minnesota guy, I believe it was a Minnesota guy at the time, had more hype and ended up winning it. But yeah, Nick Mangold was playing as a true freshman with Ohio State already having like an established center. So he was pretty good. Not unlike what, Mike Brewster did. Brewster eventually became like a 4-year starter, but he was never on a level of these 4. And yeah, I'm with you. LaCharles Bentley is the GOAT. Tom, I think that, did we go through all of the positions on offense?
We went unless you want to count place kicker.
Place kicker is Nuge. Unless you want to go like somebody else. But for me, that's who I immediately think of is Mike Nugent.
Yeah, I looked at the all-time, the all-century team from Ohio State, and Vlade Janikiewski and Tim Williams were on there. But yeah, to me, that's got to be Mike Nugent. His last, he was real shaky as a freshman, and then his last 3 seasons were just absolutely just about perfect. 65 for 74 on field goals. 2002, he was 25 for 28, and a lot of those were real high pressure kicks because they were playing a lot of close games that year. There was not a lot of this will push it from a 38-point lead to a 41-point lead. Like there was a lot of they're down by 3. They really need this one to get to overtime, or they're tied and they really need this one to win. And he was pretty much automatic. And his stat line from 2004 is remarkable because that was a standout season in a bad way for Ohio State. 2004. He kicked 24 field goals and only 30 PATs that year. That's a pretty good encapsulation. That is a pretty good encapsulation of the 2004 season. And yes, he was named team MVP. Yeah, that's. I think Nugent is a pretty clear choice here.
There was actually Heisman talk about him, like a few weeks into the season, especially like after the Marshall kick in 2004, the 55-yarder to win. But man, what an ugly season that was when your kicker is the MVP. And if that's not trustable, I don't know what is, other than your punter being the team MVP. All right, so that'll do it for the offense. We will come back on Thursday with the defense, and I'm looking forward to that one because I think there's a lot of guys there that especially some recent guys that might be in the mix there. So we will deal with that on Thursday. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out all of the shows on the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network. Tom, do you have the list in front of you?
I don't, but I'm sure I can remember it off the top of my head.
Go.
First, of course, we got to mention the Sloopcast.
Yes.
Our old buddies from many years back. Could never forget them. But we have Scoop World Order. That's Kirk Barton and his first 4 guests. He has told me his first 4 guests, and it is pretty much literally the living Mount Rushmore of Ohio State football. So he's already had Urban Meyer on. Number 2 is Orlando Pace. Numbers 3 and 4, also names you're going to know. So I'm going to just say go ahead and subscribe to Scoop World Order. The first 2 interviews that he's already recorded have both been really, really fun conversations with huge names in Ohio State football. Go ahead and subscribe to that one. Gives in the Bank, that's Mark Givler and Bill the Bank Green. They are talking a lot of Ohio State recruiting. Those guys have stories for days, and they are they've shared more than I expected them to share, because there are stories you can share and stories you can't share. They have shared some really fun stories over the last couple episodes already, and they also have the same guys also do a podcast called Vegas Knows, a kind of gambling focused podcast that is also a really fun listen. I mean, those guys are friends. You can tell they're friends when they're talking. Just it's a very fun, easy listening conversation, and lots and lots of good information there. So those are all shows that are worth checking out. You can find all of those on Apple Podcasts. Just search Buckeye Scoop, and all of those shows will come up for you. And I would strongly recommend you just subscribe to all of them. They're all fun. They're all good. And then there's also the Morning Scoop. That's a show I do every morning, Monday through Friday. And we'll just say it's kind of a easy 15 to 20 minute conversation with someone else on staff. I just had Gerd on the Tuesday episode to talk about the release that Ohio State had, the Buckeye Pledge that players had to sign, and the really weird controversy that developed out of that was kind of bizarre, but that it's just sort of a news of the day thing. And sometimes we have recruiting guys on to talk about recruiting news that they've been covering, or players to watch, or upcoming podcasts they have, just whatever kind of the news of the day is, that's on there. And it's just 15-20 minutes. You can listen while you're walking the dog or getting ready for work or commuting in or whatever. So those are all worth checking out. Just search Buckeye Scoop on Apple Podcasts, and you can subscribe to all of those.
Very nice, Tom. And I would recommend everybody to check out BuckeyeScoop.com. There's plenty of stuff for free, but it is worth the subscription to get behind the paywall and get to the message board, and also to see the other content that isn't out there for everybody. So come check us out. Sign up. I don't think you'll regret it. And in fact, you will also enjoy it. So everybody have a good one. We'll talk to you on Thursday.
Des Moines